I just want to say it is so rewarding to be here with so many people with so much exuberance. It's like I'm trying to be energetic and be like everyone else was. So I finished my bar mitzvah speech with the traditional declaration: today I am a man. And not too long after that, I walked into the neighborhood or the town Woolworth store in my hometown, intending to buy a package of women's underwear. I stood there at the counter where it was laid out, and I was trying to figure out what my size was, when a helpful saleswoman came up to me and said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Yes, I'm here. I'm looking for something here for my sister. It's her birthday." And the lady looked at me and she went, "Oh, hon, you don't want to buy her those." And then she took like a strawberry red colored two-piece bathing suit, just about the same color as the strawberry on your t-shirt there. And she held it up and she said, "You should buy her one of these." And I was too embarrassed and too shocked to negotiate with her any further. So I said, "Okay." And I took it and I walked right up to the checkout counter and I purchased it for my sister. That was the first item of women's clothing I ever bought. It was not the last. I started to cross-dress not long after that. And during the long course of my life, I amassed quite a collection at various times of women's clothing. I had them in boxes, I had them in bags, and they were all, like me, hidden in the closet. Interestingly enough, well, it's not interesting, I lived with a tremendous amount of shame as a result of that activity. I personally felt damaged, like there was something wrong with me. I couldn't talk to anyone about this, so it was a secret. I kept the secret, and I suffered for keeping the secret. I was just consumed with shame, but I continued to do it. My life went on in a pretty normal fashion, despite having that whole activity that I kept secret. I had regular heterosexual relationships, one after another. I frequently thought that they would help me stop doing what I was doing, and they didn't. I started out being a music journalist. I then went to journalism school. I became a newspaper reporter. I eventually gave that up. I went to law school. I became, when I graduated, a prosecutor up here in Hillsborough with a secret. Then not long after, after 3 years of being a prosecutor, I opened up my own practice and I did criminal defense work. Amazingly enough, despite my fear that I would eventually be revealed for what I was doing, I managed to keep that professional part of my life totally separate from the private part of my life, and also separate from my involvement with music, which continued during that period of time. Music had been the one community, and I get the sense from the people who have told stories before me that there's a common feeling, and that is one of not fitting in. Mm-hmm. So I didn't fit in, and music was the one community where I did fit in, because if you like the right bands, and if you researched bands enough, and you went to concerts, you were part of that community. Mm-hmm. So I had my work community, I had my music community, and I had my little private secret community. In my work, I was very open and accepting. I worked with people no matter how they identified, no matter how they looked, no matter where they came from. In my private life, I now regret to say, but in my private life, I was different. I didn't associate with any queer or trans people. And I didn't do that because I was afraid that if I did, that would reveal my own secret. The consequence of that was that I had relatives, I had longtime friends, and I had work acquaintances who I basically cut out of my life. And I really wasn't all that thoughtful about it and wasn't aware of what I was doing. The one area where I did continue to interact with queer people was getting my hair cut. And I was afraid at this point, being a lawyer, that I was going to lose my credibility in the rock and roll scene. And I had this sense that if I just had the perfect rock and roll haircut, I would still maintain my credibility as a music person, even though I was a suit. So I was reading in a local paper, a music paper called Two Louis here in Portland, about a person who cut the hair of my favorite local rock and roll band. And in the article, it mentioned that he was gay. And I thought, you know what? I don't care. I want that rock and roll haircut that's going to give me credibility, and I'm willing to run the risk that having him cut my hair is going to reveal somehow that I have a closet full of women's clothes stashed in my house. So I made an appointment. His salon was downtown, and I lived nearby, so I walked to the salon. And when I come into it and open the door, I'm the only one in the entire place. So just for a little bit of visual imagery, the door to the salon is here where the flag is. The waiting area is here. Where you're all sitting is the old-fashioned barber's chair that you crank up and down and it spins around. And behind that is a wall with some mirrors and a counter and the sink that he washes people's hair in before he cuts it. And so I walk in and I sit down in one of the retro chairs that is in the waiting area. And I look around and it's a beautifully put together little salon. It's spotlessly clean. There's no hair on the floor. It's very comfortable. But there's this really, really shitty odor in it. And I'm sitting there thinking, this just reeks. And I hear a toilet flush over by where the sink and the mirrors are, and there's a doorway there that has a curtain hanging over it. And the stylist comes out from that doorway. And I think, oh, that poor guy, what must have been going on in that bathroom to make it smell that bad out here in the salon. And so he kind of like looks at me, and he also looks like, you know, I'm not so sure how comfortable I am with you. And I'm thinking, oh, I must look really straight. He doesn't understand the background that I have, you know, and he's looking at me and it's too much to a lawyer. What are you doing here in a rock and roll hair salon? So he waves me over, and the chair at this point is facing the mirrors. So I walk around, I sit down in the chair, and he takes what I now suspect is called the barber's cape. And he puts the barber's cape around me, and he fastens it in the back. And he spins the chair around, so I'm now facing the door that I came in through, because he's going to lean me back and wash my hair. And when he turns the chair around, I see a bunch of brown spots on his spotlessly clean carpet. And these brown spots go from the door to the chair that I was sitting in while I waited, and then they go across the floor and they come right up to the chair that I'm now sitting in. And I know that he's looking at the same thing that I'm looking at. And at that moment I look down at my shoes, and he looks down at my shoes, and there's a big clump of dog shit on one of my shoes. And there was no question I was responsible for the odor in the salon, and in law we would call that conclusive evidence. So he actually ordered me out of the salon, pulled the cape off, said, "Get out of here." I was quite happy to leave. I was mortified. I walked back out across the carpet, the rest of the dog shit probably getting tracked as I walked out. And I didn't look back, and I never looked back. My life continued on. I managed to maintain a professional, traditional life, an alternative rock and roll music life, and a secret cross-dressing life all at the same time. And I did that for years and for decades. And they never interfered with each other. I somehow managed to pull it all off. Not that that's a good thing, but I did it. Until about 3 years ago. And that's when the stress of those 3 lives finally created so much pressure that I simply could not bear it anymore. And I came out as transgender. I finally acknowledged what I had been trying to hide since that day in Woolworths. And since then, I've managed to scrub some of the proverbial shit off of my shoes. I've found a friend of mine who actually lives in Philadelphia, and I apologized to him for distancing him when he came out to me. I recontacted cousins of mine who were gay and reconnected with them. I've interacted with colleagues of mine who I had stayed away from in the past because they were gay. And I finally found a community in which I fit naturally and with pride.